Will Carey, Assistant Commissioner for Policy, New York City Department of Transportation.
Hello, I'm Juliet Michelson, Deputy Chief of Policy and External Relations at the MTA.
Hi, I'm John McCarthy. I'm the Chief of Policy and External Relations here at the MTA.
Hi, and I'm Matt Yari. I'm a Manager of Data Science here at the MTA.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody here on day 9 of congestion pricing. I think it's obvious to everybody here that it has been a very good week here in New York. Just look out the window. There is less traffic, quieter streets, and I think everybody's seen it. We're happy to provide you with some preliminary quantitative analysis here today of what we all, I think, have seen and felt as New Yorkers. But let me first start. It's not working. Am I pointing it? Oh, now it's working too well. Okay. Just to remind ourselves, the purpose of the program is to reduce the number of vehicles entering what had been the most congested district in the country. As I was just saying, the program is working. It looks like it's working. It feels like it's working. Lots and lots of anecdotal evidence has been published in newspapers, on Twitter, at family dinners. People have been talking about how lovely it is to walk around, drive around, or take a bus in the city. But what we want to give you today is a little more rigorous quantitative analysis of some of these trends. And before we get into it, I do want to remind all of us here that this is still preliminary data. We have just completed week 1. Travel patterns we expect will change. They have already started changing. They will continue to change as people learn about the program and make new choices. We also know, we're going to talk about these 4 questions today, but we also know that people have a lot of other questions, and we do too, and we will continue to learn about the program in the weeks and months. But let's start with what we have been able to glean on these 4 points in the first week of the program. Let's start with the most obvious question. How is the program changing the number of vehicles entering the CBD? Since January 5th, we have seen anywhere between 475,000 and 560,000 vehicles enter the CBD. These are significantly lower volumes than we would have expected without the program. I'll get to that in a moment. But before we move to the next slide, I do want to point out, if you look carefully, that the traffic volumes have increased over the course of the week, and that was always fully anticipated. Anyone who studies traffic patterns in the city knows that Sunday is the lightest traffic day, followed by Monday. Traffic increases over the course of the week. Friday tends to be the most congested day, and that is in fact what we saw this week, just as we have seen every week. Just as we see every week in the city. So now, how many vehicles would have entered without the congestion relief zone tolling? It's obviously very difficult to know exactly how many vehicles would have entered, but there are a few things we can look at. The most relevant is the NIMTIC hub-bound data. NIMTIC every fall comes out with not just an estimate, but a count of how many vehicles enter the CBD. This is the gold standard for this type of data. We've looked at 2022 data. We've had a preview of the 2023 data that is not quite published, but is about to be. We've also compared both of those numbers to the entries that we observed, thanks to our detection system, on a handful of days that we were conducting system testing in the fall. All three numbers, incidentally, were all within just a few thousand vehicles of each other, and that's why we're confident in saying that the baseline that we are looking at for a typical October day is 642,000 vehicles entering the CBD. Now, we also know that January is a typically low traffic month. It's often cold, there are snowstorms, people stay home, people drive less. On average, we looked at our own TBTA crossings data, DOT crossings data, and Port Authority crossings data, and have found that on average, there are 9% fewer vehicles on the road in the month of January than in the month of October. So a baseline that we are conservatively looking at for a month of January is 583,000 vehicles. And even with that conservative baseline, we find that if you average out the number of entries made into the CBD last week from Monday to Friday, we are seeing 7.5% fewer vehicles enter the CBD than we would have expected. So how do fewer vehicles entering the zone change driving times? Are drivers getting around any faster? The answer is yes, drivers are saving time. The greatest improvements are occurring on inbound river crossings. We'll get to that in a moment. The effect is particularly pronounced in the morning commute when the peak period toll is in effect. We're also seeing improved trip times throughout the CBD, especially at the busiest times of day in the afternoon. So in a moment, we'll be looking at trip time data. For the most part, we'll be focusing on the afternoon because those are the busiest times of the day. But for river crossing data, we'll be looking at AM peak. That's when most people are commuting into to the office. So let's talk for a moment about sources of data. There are a handful of different sources of data for traffic trip times and traffic speeds that we considered. The best data for zonal traffic speed is data that the DOT and TLC collect from taxi and FHVs. That data, while methodologically very sound and very useful, is not available for another week or two. So that is a data set that we are going to be relying on moving forward. We just don't have access to it quite yet. There's also Google and Waze data. I think folks have seen the congestion pricing tracker that has been circulated on the internet. It's a really fun tracker that compares how traffic has behaved this past week compared to the last 6 months. It's a really compelling product that's been developed by a couple of students under working with Professor Emily Oster. But that data is, as I was saying earlier, not comparing January to January. They're comparing January to the last 6 months. And we felt like it was important to take into account the seasonal variation that we know exists. So we have turned to Transcom data. Transcom, if you aren't familiar, is a coalition of 16 public agencies in the tri-state transit area that coordinate on transportation management purposes. So the advantage of Transcom data, it is available in near real time, and it provides trip times on particular stretches of roadway. This is what you're seeing here on the map. We'll be looking at each of these categories in a moment. In blue, well, we'll start with the river crossings in green, then we'll get to the east-west and north-south stretches, and finally we'll talk about trip times on excluded roadways. One thing you should know about the Transcom data is that it is difficult to aggregate it between days. So we've selected Wednesday as the day to study. Wednesday, January 8th was, Wednesdays in general are typical traffic days. The patterns we saw on that day are reflective of the patterns we saw throughout the week. And we're comparing, in the next few slides, we'll be comparing Wednesday, January 8th to the average Wednesday in January of 2024. Okay, with that, let's first start by pointing out the really, really significant trip time improvements that we are seeing on all river crossings. This is huge, 30% to 40% trip time savings across the board. There are a couple of outliers, and we're looking into them. The Holland Tunnel seems to be above average. We believe maybe there was construction happening on the Jersey side last January. We're looking into that. The Manhattan Bridge stands at 10% reduction, also going to be, maybe explained by other things, we don't know. But for one day of data to see such consistently high trip time reductions is just very, very significant, and we're very happy to see it. We're also seeing consistent trip time improvements on east-west streets as well. We're now looking at PM peaks. There are a couple of outliers on 23rd Street, on 42nd Street. This will happen on any given day, and we'll look at them. But for the most part, 20 to 30% reductions. Great news.
Hey, folks, just so you're aware, you're going to walk out with a full copy of this deck. So for those of you with the cell phones making shots, you could do it, but we're going to hand you a copy as soon as this is done.
Great. On north-south avenues, the results are more mixed. Some avenues are seeing 20% trip times. Others are more flat, although I'm told by my friends on DRT that, again, things might be happening on 2nd Avenue, 5th Avenue. So much more to learn. But I just, this is what we're seeing on Wednesday, January 8th. On the FDR and the West Side Highway is a similar story, even though those are so-called excluded highways. In other words, if drivers stay exclusively on those highways, they will not be charged the toll. Trip times seem to be overall improved. Okay, so now let's look at bus riders. We're the MTA. We need to make sure that our bus riders are also benefiting from these improvements in traffic. And they are. We're seeing buses moving faster, especially in the morning peak. The buses are benefiting from those reduced trip times on the East River and the Hudson River, particularly our express bus routes that utilize those crossings. So there are 122 bus routes that enter the CBD. We're not going to go over all of them, but we did pick a representative sample to start explaining the patterns that we're seeing. Let's look first at the B39. This is a short route, just a couple of miles. It goes over the Williamsburg Bridge, and we chose it because it illustrates pretty clearly the advantage of having less congestion in the zone, which means that the traffic is not backing up onto the bridge. So what you're seeing in the blue line is a traffic speed on, this time we're looking at the average morning peak, 5 days of morning peak bus speed data, compared to, in gray, the average bus speeds in January of 2024. Again, all weekdays. So traffic, the bus speed is reduced once it gets to the zone, once it gets to Manhattan, to the grid, I should say, but it backs up much closer to Delancey Street than it used to, and therefore the riders who take the B39 have seen a 28% reduction in travel time. That is a significant reduction. Let's look at the Lincoln Tunnel. The SIMF 24 that travels over the Lincoln Tunnel. Before it reaches the Lincoln Tunnel, it starts in very southern Staten Island, makes its way through New Jersey. On that long part of the route, the first 25 miles, the trip times are very comparable to last year. They've even maybe dipped a little bit. Traffic seems to be increasing region-wide. But then the bus hits the Lincoln Tunnel and gains a full 7 minutes in travel time compared to January of last year, fully making up the 4 minutes and then some that might have been lost earlier in the route. This is great news for our SIM 21 riders. It's also great news for New Jersey Transit bus riders. We don't have access to the data, but there are thousands of New Jersey Transit bus riders that depend on a free-flowing Lincoln Tunnel and assume that this has made a big difference to them. The SIM 4X also travels from Staten Island to Manhattan, this time through the Hugh Carey Tunnel and the Verrazano Bridge. Again, this is a long route, 20 miles, where riders are seeing a 6% faster travel speed, mostly achieved going through the Hugh Carey Tunnel. We'll come back to this line when we talk about how congestion relief is attracting transit ridership. North-south, we talked earlier about the effects on traffic speeds being a little bit more moderate. Here, the M102, I'm sorry, is traveling roughly at the same speed as last year. And finally, we have our M50, which I believe has been noted to be one of the slowest buses in Manhattan. It travels across the island, but now in 5% less time than it used to. So good news there. The last question we'll look at is how the program has changed transit ridership. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. People have posted or even been on buses, trains, subways that they have felt was crowded and wondered, geez, is this because of congestion pricing? And I just want to remind people, as we have said many times before, the vast, vast majority of people who enter the CBD, whether it is for work or leisure, take public transportation. Even before the program launched last week, for every one driver who commuted to work by car, there were 9 who took transit. And while we hope that many of these drivers do switch to public transportation, we have great service. Transit is always very affordable. We're welcoming them. The scale of our system, we carry more than 6 million people every day on subways, buses, paratransit, and railroads. The scale of that system means that the effects of drivers switching to transit are muted. We wouldn't see those shift in system-wide numbers. Okay? That said, there are particular geographies, and we are looking at them, where neighborhoods, where people might be driving from particular neighborhoods who have a new option that might be more attractive to them, perhaps an express bus option. That's why we're looking at express bus, and what we've found, again, preliminary findings, is that ridership growth has been higher than average on a handful of routes, coming from Brooklyn, Eastern Brooklyn, coming from Staten Island. There's that SIM 24 that we were talking about before, and from the Rockaways. So we're monitoring the capacity, not just of routes, but of individual buses on these routes and on the express bus network in general, and none of them are reaching 90% capacity, which is our service capacity guideline. There is plenty of room. No one is being turned away. But we are keeping, and we also have plenty of room to welcome people on subways, on Long Island Railroad, on Metro North, on local buses. We're below December ridership levels. We're below October ridership levels. We are still far below pre-pandemic ridership levels. We have plenty of capacity to welcome new transit riders. Okay, so to recap, it's been a great week in traffic, a great week for New York. In the first 5 weekdays of the program, CBD entries were down 8% from the January estimated baseline, which was a conservative baseline. We've had some variation, as expected, over the course of the week. Travel times were significantly shorter on inbound river crossings, particularly in the morning commute. There were also consistently faster travel times throughout the day, and most crucially, in the afternoon when traffic is the slowest. And then our bus riders, particularly our express bus riders, are also benefiting from faster traffic, and as service improves, maybe attracting new riders as well. We'll continue to monitor this, and as I said earlier, there's still a lot to learn about the program, but this is what we have learned in the first week. And with that, I will hand the mic back over to Tim, who is somewhere.
Yeah, is there anybody else up there who wants to say anything? Will? No? John, you good? All right, questions. Let's start with Andrew Siff of WNBC. Andrew.
Julia, you didn't mention any revenue from the first week. Do you have any rough figures on how much money the MTA took in and whether it's either at or above what you were looking for?
To be perfectly frank with you, we have not looked at revenue numbers. What is most on our mind at this point in time is that New Yorkers see and feel the effects of congestion pricing in their lives, and that's what we most wanted to know about first. But we will be looking at that, obviously.
Just one other quick follow-up, which is, have you found any choke points, problems with the grid? For example, near the Queensboro Bridge in Manhattan, we've heard from folks who say everybody's taken the upper level to avoid the toll. Has that created traffic where you didn't anticipate it?
I don't know the answer to that, but Will would.
January is typically the quietest month. We're looking at things like what's going on with the Queensboro Bridge upper level and monitoring those volumes. We're not seeing anything terribly out of the ordinary this week.
And Andrew, I'd just add to that we worked in anticipation of the start, worked very closely with New York City Police Department's transportation department, who have the folks out there, make sure so we were able to identify potential choke points well in advance and work with New York City DOT as well to make sure the right people are there to make sure traffic's moving.
All right, Lindsay Tuckman, WABC, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Thank you. Are there any projections on data, given that it was the first week? Maybe people decided to wait it out to see how it was. It is January. Is there any projection that the numbers of people driving in will go up pretty quickly? How much of this data is an indication of what we will see moving forward?
If I knew, I would play the lottery. We don't know.
All right, Vanessa, you have a question? Nope. Let's go to Ramsey Khalifa right here, WNYC, Gothamist.
How's it going? Just two questions. So can you just confirm that the daytime hours, you saw a larger reduction in traffic compared to the overnight hours? And then I have a second question, maybe I can just have you answer that one.
Yes, that is correct.
And then just a technical question. So obviously this is pegged to a bond that the MTA is trying to take out. Can you just confirm that it's going to take a year before the MTA can issue that bond for the previous capital plan?
I'll get back to you. I think that's something that our CFO is watching closely as far as when he can anticipate going to market with that.
All right, speaking of CFO business, Michelle Kasky right next door,
And can
Bloomberg
I
News.
just to the first question you asked, yes, in that as far as the movement of traffic, the decrease more during, obviously the toll differential is huge, 75%. So you definitely see a flat number. It's during the overnight. It's sort of, it's not as much of a mover for how people are driving. So that sort of makes sense to us.
Michelle.
Hi, thanks for this briefing. So I've just a couple of quick questions. I just want to double check again about the revenue collections. Is the anticipation the expectation that it would bring in about 500 million a year? Is that number correct to use to report?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
And how soon how soon will you be showing what revenue collections are looking like so far?
Look, I think this is something that's going to be a matter of weeks, not months. What we, you know, there's the complexities involved, the different tolling, the different prices per vehicle as we understand what vehicles are coming in. Also, toll by mail, we're really, really pushing people to sign up, make sure their Easy Pass tags are the same as their license, match with their license plate. There is a period of time where there is no penalty charge for the toll by mail. Is that correct?
2 months.
2 months. So but it's a weeks, not months thing. Was where.
And in terms of the decrease in what you're seeing so far in the preliminary data of a decrease in traffic, is that primarily coming from passenger vehicles, from trucks? Have you been able to drill down that to see if you're getting a bigger drop in cars or trucks, or is it a mix?
We haven't done that analysis yet. As you can imagine, this has been a fire hose of data for the last month, and this is what we've learned this week. For the last week, sorry, and this is what we've learned this week. I will remind folks, though, that 9 out of 10 vehicles are passenger cars and taxis, right? So the number of trucks, only 4% of entries are truck entries.
But Michelle, we watch closely. A reduction in a truck is a big deal.
Yes.
That's a lot of traffic that's reduced. Also, which doesn't show up in these numbers, it comes as an equal number of vehicles entering the zone. But if a truck moves to the overnight, that's very good for us. So we suspect there's a little bit of that happening as well. We'll know more in the coming months.
All right, look up to the mezzanine. That's Ted Goldberg with New Jersey Spotlight News. Ted.
Hey, how you guys doing? Appreciate you holding this. You guys have said it yourself. You're only looking at a week's worth of data, although, like you said, a fire hose of data. So at what point do you kind of look at these numbers and say, okay, it's not just a blip, it's not just 5 days. These are solid trends. These are appreciable. These are things that we could run a serious analysis with. Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a full year? So that way you can compare every month with a previous month from a previous year?
I mean, I think it'll all be shades of gray, right? We'll know more every week that passes. And some data also comes with a lag, right? So we've talked about zonal traffic speeds come with a lag. We'll talk one day, we will be able to update you on what we call vehicle miles traveled, which is a total miles that have been driven in the zone. That comes with, I believe, a 2-month lag. So we will complete the picture as soon as we can.
Samantha Liebman right there, New York 1 in the corner.
I have 2 questions. I know the law doesn't require a dashboard, but rather twice a year reporting and environmental reporting as the information becomes available. But Jano seemed to indicate that there may be a dashboard in the works. Is that going to be in the works for people to see this kind of information more regularly, and when could we see that? And also, I noticed some of the north-south routes that didn't have reductions. Some of them are truck routes, and do you think that maybe that has something to do with it?
So there's, you may have seen Fifth Avenue is about the same as it was last year. There's substantial construction happening close to 57th Street in the road. There's also the security cordon around Trump Tower. So we expect both of those are probably causing some congestion. On 2nd Avenue, the speeds are about the same. So we're looking at, is there construction? Is there a crash? Are there other things that may be explaining those things? I think we just need more data over several more weeks to say definitively what's happening.
Yep, so we have built a dashboard. We will be updating it on a monthly cadence to be tied to our regular data reporting that we do for board meetings. The first set of data should be available in time for the February board meeting. Again, some data comes with a lag, so not all of it will be available then. But as soon as it is available, yes, we totally understand that transparency in this moment is particularly important. New Yorkers have to understand what the benefits of the program are.
All right, moving on to Pix 11's Anthony DiLorenzo right here. Anthony?
Thank you. Two questions. Is there any area specifically in Manhattan that you've seen where cars are just stopping and then hopping on to transit in order to not have to go in to the CBD? They might have crossed over a river, but they want to park their car in Manhattan. Are there any areas where you have seen that? And secondly, when you saw this data and you compiled it all, did this hit expectations? Did it exceed expectations? What was your reaction to it?
So on parking, where DOT is legislatively required to do a parking study, and we have done a substantial amount of pre-data collection to look at parking availability, both in the core and in neighborhoods around the core and in neighborhoods where there are major transit transfer points. So, and we'll be going back now that the program is in effect to see if there are changes there. And we'll be having more to say about that later. Just in terms of like the regular monitoring we do through our traffic management center, our network of cameras, just people on the ground, we're not getting reports of that kind of, I'm trying to drive to 61st Street Park and then take the one train into the core kind of behavior.
And then Juliet, what was your reaction to the data?
I mean, look, I think overall, I feel like this has absolutely met our expectations. The numbers are impressive. I think what I feel most personal satisfaction, but what I'm most happy about is just how many people have lived it and experienced it and seen it with their own two eyes. Again, whether they are pedestrian or a driver or a bus rider, I think everybody here has noticed a difference, and that's just really significant for the city.
Just an anecdote to illustrate that. On the Williamsburg Bridge, there's a light at Allen Street. And so if you're going from Brooklyn into Manhattan, that light causes a line of cars during the AM peak. And when traffic is really bad, that line of cars can extend all the way back to that tower, the main tower in Brooklyn. And what we've seen this week is consistently that line doesn't even reach the tower on the Manhattan side. So, that's an indicator that volumes are down and that vehicles are moving more fluidly.
Over there, we've got Rye Rivard from Politico. Rye.
Two things. One, the Emily Oster, like you can drink coffee and run when you're pregnant, Emily Oster? Okay. And then two, help me with the fluctuations in a month. Like, is a 10% fluctuation in a January something you would see if there was a state of emergency and people were not supposed to be driving in New Jersey, or is 8% like totally insane and unheard of?
It's significant. January is the lowest traffic month throughout the year, but that's a change, and certainly the volumes that we're seeing on our own East River crossings are consistent, if not greater than those numbers. But more data, more time.
Historically, do we know what the inter-month variance is? Like,
Sure, there are sources of data, like the MTA has its bridges and tunnels, and they know, because they're collecting tolls, how much traffic are on those spans. The Port Authority has similar data. There are places in the city that have continuing data collectors, so they're counting vehicles at certain parts of the highway network at any one time. So yes, the normal variation, the seasonal variation in terms of volumes across the city is well known, and this is interesting.
All right, welcoming back to 2 Broadway, David Meyer from Streets Blog, everybody. David.
Thank you, Tim. I got 2 questions. On the M50, we sent a reporter out to the M50 last week, as you included in your slideshow. A lot of the bus drivers said that, congestion pricing is great. It's definitely moving faster, but they also cited obstructions in the road, like double parking and other sorts of bus stop blocking, those sorts of things. How much is that impacting those bus speeds? And separately or related, how much do you account for, buses holding their position in order to stay on schedule in those bus speed measurements?
Yeah, David, both of those things are right. There's always an impact from what else is going on in the environment, whether it's double parking or blocking a bus lane. So that's going to have an impact, and it's possible that you're not going to appreciate the full benefit of reduced traffic in those scenarios. So we'll watch them closely, and obviously enforcement's a big part of that. As far as bus schedules, that's another thing we watch very closely. Particularly, it's interesting on the express buses as it picks up time. So if you're on your way in and if we see consistently we're picking up, 3, 4, 5 minutes in a tunnel, you're going to want to reflect that at the stops. Otherwise, these are scheduled stopping patterns. So it's something we'll be aware of. And I assume City DOT has the same way they address traffic lights and other things as traffic changes. It's like a normal course of managing traffic.
Understood. And my second question, we've done our own analysis, I guess, of the Queens Midtown Tunnel and Hugh Carey tunnels. Comparing to the last few years, it seemed like with the pandemic excluded, traffic on those crossings has increased year over year over year. This is the first year they've decreased, I don't know, in at least a decade, half a decade. So is it safe to say the congestion pricing has slowed those trends, reversed those trends, bucked those trends?
I mean, it certainly seems like this is a step change difference, right? This is not just a small incremental reduction, the way the last 10 years have seen small incremental increases. Can I predict the future? No, but this does feel fundamentally different to us.
Thank you.
All right, Evan Simcoe Benarski right there from your New York hometown newspaper, the Daily News. Evan.
Hey, guys. So the cameras have been on, prior to the toll being instituted for about 6 months or so. And when we were asking about, data from that, the answer that we were given was, well, they're on for testing. We're still sort of teaching the system what is a truck. Do you see the same car going up the FDR, going onto the surface streets? So I guess my question, as you guys prepare to start taking on revenue data, is, has that sort of moment of teething passed? Does the system now sort of know what a truck is, or is there still going to be, a built-in lag, for a couple of weeks, a couple of months while the system sort of figures that out?
If Allison were here, Allison DiSereno, she would give you a more technical answer, but it seems like we have absolutely fine-tuned the algorithms. Now, will a mistake never happen? I don't know. Probably something will come up, but it's been a week and we've had exceedingly few issues. So we're happy to see about that.
All right, let's go back there to Linda Schmidt from Fox 5. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Tim. And I apologize. I was running late, so I apologize. So I'm sure you've probably answered this question already. But regarding the data, are the data really indicative of what is really going on with congestion pricing, whether it is successful or whether it's not? Because so many people were just getting back from vacation. Some are not even back yet, even today. But also last week we had that really bad weather the one day in the morning. So are these really accurate numbers that we're talking about here as we move forward? And then I have a follow-up question.
Well, I'll answer that quickly, Linda. What we did was, in anticipation of that, the reason we have it seasonally adjusted, monthly adjusted, is for that very reason. So January, as Will said, is historically the lowest driving month. And so when we did our observed number, this is this past October, so this is based on what we're seeing, we put a seasonal number onto that, which brought it down. So we think we're very comfortable with this incredibly conservative number. It sort of reflects the concept of vacation, snow, so it's and just the way people travel in the winter. So we're comfortable with it.
Do you think it's going to then get even better from here?
Well, it depends. Also, traffic might go up from here too. So that's why we're being very careful, conservative about how we view this. But as you go into the spring months, we would under ordinary circumstances, without congestion pricing, you would have a growth in driving, and you might see some growth compared to today, but it will be below that baseline, we believe, and we hope.
Okay, and then just one more follow-up real quickly, because we had done several stories last week where the mapping that you guys had, it was inaccurate for East 61st Street between York and First Avenue, and people were getting charged by Uber that $1.50 and by some other for-hire vehicles at that location. That mapping issue has been fixed, but my question to you is this. Have you received any other complaints about any other areas in the city dealing with that same issue with for-hire vehicles not having the proper mapping and then people being charged who should not be charged because they're not below 60th?
No, we have not. And I do want to say to that particular point, the person who was charged drove off of 61st Street up a driveway deep into the block, more than halfway to 60th Street, and that is where the boundary was drawn. So Uber refunded them. It was an issue that happened on a couple successive days in a row until the issue was addressed very, very quickly, and we haven't seen any other similar cases.
Okay, great. You guys adjusted your mapping, though.
Yes.
Because it wasn't that deep into it. They didn't get to 60th Street with that driveway because, they would have to go through the actual foyer of the building in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I think she answered that question. Let's go on to Barbara Russo from AM New York. Barbara.
Can you hear me? Okay. So you do expect more express bus riders or bus riders in general, which is great. And I took a look at your numbers from last year at this time versus this year, and the ridership is up, which is also great. But I'm hearing from a lot of people in the outer boroughs, and my own experiences too, that buses are passing them up. They're just so crowded, specifically this past week. And I know it's kind of an ongoing issue with express buses, so I don't know. I don't even know if you guys can answer this question, but are there any plans to, add more buses or better the service?
So we'll find out what bus you're talking about. We watch this very closely in terms of riders. We know how many people are on every bus. So, we have a view into this, and, we know that the express buses are not at or near capacity. Now, can you get a bus that will be, absolutely, that's going to happen from time to time. But we'll watch it closely, and we adjust our bus service as needed. So and the same with, look, the railroads. I read a story this week where it said something like we hit 3.2 million subway riders, and that it was overcrowding, and people were very sad and upset, and people, and then I was like, this can't be. What is? And I grew up in the city. I remember, like, wasn't it like 5 million subway riders? It's been over 6 million in a day. So we looked it up, and then I remember doing a press release this year on how we hit 4.5 million riders in a day just a couple of months ago. So then I went back to the article and I said 3.2 versus 4.5. That's a lot less. I don't think that's overcrowding. So sometimes people write things or say things that are inaccurate. I don't know why, but we will, I'm not saying on the express, but that's something we're watching closely, because we do think more people will take the express bus, particularly if, they're coming from neighborhoods where there's no subway service, right?
Right, Staten Island.
And we did add some express bus service already, and I think we have some planned to come on board soon. So, but that's a per bus, like specific bus things, and we do see those numbers. So, but we will watch that very closely.
Thank you.
All right, here's Jake Offenhartz right here from the Reach Around the Globe news organization, the Associated Press. Jake.
Thank you, Tim. On the fourth point, the subway ridership, I want to make sure that I'm understanding how you put it, that you're saying that we wouldn't see any sort of changes regardless because we're talking about such a small piece of the ridership pie, or we're not seeing any changes right now that could change in the future? Maybe help me understand where we're at on that.
System-wide, our expectation is that we would see a 1% increase in transit ridership, simply because the base of riders is so big, okay? So that, you know, you don't have to be a statistics guru to understand that that is difficult to measure. There's natural fluctuations. Sometimes it rains and people stay home, and that's more than a 1% difference. So that's why, to us, it's much more relevant to be looking at particular neighborhoods where folks might want to be changing their traffic patterns.
And at this point, are we seeing any sign of that in certain neighborhoods where people might be changing traffic patterns?
After week 1, we identified a handful of lines, a handful of those express bus lines. We'll also be looking at railroad stations next, but, you know, again, for week 2.
Yeah, and just to go back on something like an express bus, it's, you know, you're dealing with a single bus, and there's, you know, that's something we'll watch very closely, right? On a railroad, it's, you know, can carry upwards of 1,000 people, so there is capacity that we know of, and again, we track it very closely. The other thing we'll watch is like parking. Are people going to certain parking lots to get, you know, they're going to change their travel patterns? That's okay. There's, again, capacity. We have railroad parking lots. I think in Westbury we have over 50% availability. Ronkonkoma, we have less so in Mineola. But these are opportunities if people want to change the way they travel into the city. And then, of course, on the subway, it's just there's a lot of capacity that's available. And but, you know, again, there as well, we're running more service than we did pre-COVID. But we'll watch that closely and adjust. It's, you know, it's something that's what we do, is run, you know, train and rail service and the like. So the other thing is, we don't have an insight into how New Jersey Transit's doing, but, you know, as Juliet went through the Lincoln Tunnel, you know, that's a big bonus if you're coming in from Jersey and you're picking up that time. That might attract more people to their service. So we'll watch that, as well as coach buses and the like. So these are all things that we're going to be watching closely over the coming weeks and months.
All right, sitting back there in the loge, that's Hannah Furyk from the New York Post. Hannah?
Hi. I had a question about exemption. So there's been some talk of firefighters, police officers, you know, being exempt when they come into the city from paying the congestion toll. We've heard some concern that that tax is going to end up falling back onto New Yorkers, since they're state employees. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, so sure. The law, as written 5 years ago, exempt emergency vehicles. And as far as how public sector and private sector workers get into their jobs, it, you know, again, that's, you're about to ask.
Well, yeah, I'm aware of that. My question is, you know, if, like, they're talking about firefighters and police officers getting exempt through their organizations.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be through collective bargaining, and that is, you know, ordinarily, for instance, some people who work, you know, I've worked in a job where I worked an overnight, right, and I was paid time and a half. You get a night differential. It sort of assumes that there's a different expense that you might take on personally, and then, of course, if you have a travel expense that your employer demands you to take, that's something we would, you know, that's always brought up in collective bargaining. So that's the appropriate place for that to take place in. I'm familiar with a lot of these contracts anyway, and, you know, they do have travel time, or the actual business provides the transportation, but that's the appropriate place. But, you know, I to go back to the emergency vehicle, that is very important. That is part of the law, and as far as other exemptions, that was considered by that outside body, the TMRB, that reviewed it. They came to some conclusions. Those conclusions were made part of the toll, and that's what we have in place right now.
All right, down to the last few minutes, Alfonso Castillo from Newsday, in person today.
Hello. Couple questions about Long Island Railroad ridership. So understanding that some of these numbers are so small that they kind of get lost in the mix, is there anything indicating any kind of increase in Long Island Railroad ridership? Certainly, anecdotally, people have been saying they've been noticing it at their station, but there's a thought as to whether what they're noticing is the difference from the holidays. There was a 10% increase compared to the same period last year, but as Janos talked about, ridership grew all year. So it's all to say, is there anything to take from LIR ridership?
Yeah, I think there's, Look, it's an area where we anticipate some growth. It's, and like you said, Alfonso, it's not a huge, but, we think there's opportunity there for people, anybody who is commuting into the city every day, changing that pattern over to the railroad. We think that there's a real possibility. So that's why we want to watch parking, boarding stations. We're also looking very closely at city ticket sales because we think that in the area of Southeast Queens, where folks currently, again, it's an area where you might not have a subway, you haven't really transitioned over to the railroad. And remember, the city ticket really was only expanded the last year or so into that 24/7 availability. So we think there might be opportunities where people say, I'm going to try this out, and if it's something that works for them, they might stick with it. But again, we know there's room there, and if that becomes an issue, we'll make that adjustment. But those are the areas: city ticket, and watching the parking, where people are parking. They might go to closer in stations, things like that.
And one follow-up. I don't know if this is something that would be caught in the data you collected, but is there anything to indicate a rise in the use of ghost plates, ghost vehicles, cars without plates to dodge these tolls?
Well, we haven't seen that yet. But I'll tell you that we are monitoring it closely. We're working very closely with the NYPD, MTA PD, and on enforcement measures. So we're, whether they are seen or unseen, they have traffic plate readers, and it's that's something that we're taking very seriously. We're watching very closely. And again, we talk about this a lot. It's not just about toll evasion. You're driving around without a plate. That's not really good behavior, because there are people walking on the streets, something happens, that's a problem. So, and it goes well beyond toll evasion.
Yeah, and the Interagency Task Force, Alfonso, this is up to its 64th operation, and the mayor, on top of that, last week announced the city is going to do something entirely separate, more enforcement of ghost plates. So that's out there too. All right, we got time for one more. Over there, Jose? No? Yes? No?
Yeah. Hey, Tim.
Jose Martinez,
Hey, everyone.
with the city to wrap up.
I was actually going to ask what Alfonso was asking about the ghost plates. Is there anything you could say about, at this point, and I know it's early, how the scanners, the cameras are working in terms of catching would-be scammers, or?
No, but we look. We are, as Juliet said, the technology is working very well, and we have a whole human side to it as well, reviewing all the footage. So it's I think it makes sense. Don't do that if you're considering it.
All right, thanks everybody. He is John J. McCarthy. That's Juliet Michelson. Gentleman on the left is the guy from DOT whose sound should not be appearing in your stories, but you can quote him. And then Matt Yari over there is our data guy. Thanks everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you.